Welcome everyone to Doing Life. Today's topic that we're going to be talking about is sex. Everyone's favorite topic, right? Or maybe one of those topics that everyone thinks about but no one wants to talk about, right? And especially in the Christian world, actually, I think a lot of times there can be a lot of shame and guilt and pain around the topic of sex. So then it becomes very taboo. And I think actually that's to the detriment of the church. And what I mean by that is sex is not the devil's idea, it's God's idea. God created sex to be this beautiful picture of oneness, to be this gift in marriage, and all these different things. And I think we have to start there. Before we go anywhere, we have to talk about the fact that sex is God's idea, and us being sexual beings with a sexuality is God's idea. I think all the way back to Genesis, right? You can, if you want to know God's intention for something, all you got to usually do is go to the first page of the Bible. And we see in Genesis that God created male plus female, and he gave them this mission to do. He gave them go create, go cultivate, go make the world awesome and beautiful, just like the Garden of Eden. And to do that, you're going to need a lot of babies, right? You're going to need a lot of babies. And the awesome part...
he commanded to have sex.
Exactly. He said, be fruitful and multiply.
Probably your favorite commandment.
Exactly, right? And one of the first commandments in the Bible is to do that, is to make babies. And I'm fine with that command. But it's important. It's God's idea. And we have to put that on the table. I don't think God created Adam and Eve, walked away, and then turned back and said, oh, no, what are you guys doing? That's not what I had in mind, right? No, it actually is God's idea. And we got to be okay talking about it. I think in the church we do a disservice because here's the truth of the matter. Sex is everywhere. Right? Go stand in line at the grocery store. Go scroll on your phone on Facebook.
TV.
Go watch a TV commercial.
Oh my goodness.
You can't get away from it. And so I think it's actually, again, to the detriment of us if everyone's talking about it with unhealthy views and in an unhealthy way, and yet we're not. And so, yeah, talk to me about what you were saying earlier, what you think about it.
Yeah, so I think sex is so important. I think it's really important to have it within marriage, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But also I think sex kind of shows the pulse of the relationship. Like if I've noticed sometimes if Jeff will be like, oh, hey, let's get it on tonight. And I'm like, oh, I'm too tired. And I stop and think about it. I'm like, I'm not really too tired. Most of the time it's because I haven't felt like we connected that day or I felt kind of hurt by something. And so it's an opportunity to bring that up and talk about it. And if you are like having sex and enjoying it, it's showing that you have a really healthy relationship, that you guys are doing really well. They're always related.
Yeah, and I think, this is what we're trying to say. And again, we're just going to be honest and blunt in this episode, and we'll also get into really some deep pastoral issues that we want to talk about as well. But one thing we're trying to say from the outset is it's important and it's central to a healthy marriage. And the way we like to put it is we don't know anyone with a great sex life that has a terrible marriage, and we don't know anyone with a great marriage that has a terrible sex life. They go hand in hand. It's kind of a microcosm, a pulse of the health and wellness of a marriage. So we're going to toss to a video real quick. This is actually a spoken word that I wrote called Sexual Healing, a little play on words with the Marvin Gaye song. And this specifically dives into what we just talked about. Let's be honest, let's be blunt, and let's talk about the fact that a lot of us actually are walking in a journey of wholeness and healing because we've had some brokenness in our past. So I hope you enjoy.
So let's look at the subject. I'm going to tell you why I'm disgusted. So tonight, looks like sex will be our topic of discussion. Now see, sex isn't evil, for marriage is why God made it. But I know you're like, come on, man, that's too outdated. This is 2011, bro. We do it for recreation. And hey, if you're in college, you do it while you're wasted. But I want to question this logic. I want to pop off the seal. I want to question something that we think is already a done deal. So take a rape victim, for example, and once it's revealed, when her bruises go away, is she totally healed? Nah, the damage is lasting. You can see it in her eyes. But if it was just abused recreation, why did it ruin her life? I mean, if sex is just for fun, why does it take such a toll? Maybe it's because you don't just have sex with a body, you have sex with a soul. Which means for me, there ain't no premarital loving. And it ain't just because I want a baby in the oven, it's because I'm staying pure till the day that I'm a husband. But see, this wasn't always me. That's a guarantee. Let's go back in the past, see who I used to be. Now, growing up, I never learned how to treat a lady. If I learned one thing from my dad, it was leave the mom, ditch the baby. Now, I don't say that to get sympathy, I say that to be real. Because according to stats, about 40% of you know how that feels. So I let the TV show me what the music already told me. No dad at home, so I was letting MTV mold me. And they sold me, which is why my life revolved around what girl I could get next. My life revolved around this girl named sex. Shoot, I'd get at her on the text, but I gotta confess, it seems the longer we dated, the bigger the mess. But then, my girlfriend was late on that time of the month. If you know what I mean, you understand when I say my heart sunk. I started to think about abortion, man. I started to butter it up. But it's funny, they don't make condoms for sin. You can't just cover it up. It was just a scare, but I knew a father I didn't want to be. It's funny how I was pro-life until it happened to me. So dudes, think twice before you desire her just because she's hot. Because the truth is, your body makes a promise whether you do or not. Sorry I digressed though, let's get back to the topic. How there's some dudes who pressure her even when she says stop it. You're not a man, you're just a boy that can shave and you put on a good cover. Because if you don't respect her when she says no, you certainly don't love her. So how about you start studying her heart, stop studying her booty, or maybe invest the same amount of time in her that you do in Call of Duty. Because what makes you think you can get this girl and all of a sudden get naughty? Because you should have to touch her heart and her mind first before you ever touch her body. Because she longs to be accepted, she longs to be loved, so she gives herself up to another guy's lust. She thinks it feels good at first, but then she gets bitter. Because the promise of satisfaction, it never delivers. She's like, I don't want to, but it's just too tempting. So she keeps opening up the present just to find that it's empty. And then she starts to get confused. She keeps getting rejected by all these dudes. They tell her on a scale of 10, she's a 2. But that ain't true. If she only knew that Jesus, he loves and accepts us. Even when you don't want him, he'll never reject us. He heals us from that sin that totally infects us. And he does what condoms can't. He emotionally protects us. And I know some of you hear this, you're gonna want to indict me. But we gotta think rightly, so I'll ask politely. Can you really say this isn't even true, just slightly? I mean, we touched the forbidden fruit, about to realize it's poison ivy, and now we're numb and we're itching, and we got a distorted psyche. You don't think you just do it, like your name was Nike, not realizing that the consequences of your actions are oh so pricey. So this last story, though, is for those who think they're too dirty. This last story is for those who think they're unworthy. Read John chapter 8, the woman caught in adultery. The religious leaders throw her naked in the temple while she yells, "Don't murder me." They say, Jesus, the law commands us to stone this woman. And you hear the hate in their tone. Jesus pauses it and says, whoever's without sin, you can cast the first stone. I mean, can you imagine the sound? Silence all around. You hear footsteps walk away, you hear stones hit the ground. And then Jesus kneels down. The woman thought it was her demise. He lifts up her face. You see the grace in his eyes. He says, I don't condemn you. Go and sin no more. I love you. I accept you. Mercy is yours. But if you're anything like me, you're like, no, that can't be. Why would he ever die for me? See, but then I saw that scene where I was redeemed. He reached out and touched me and said, Jeff, you're free. Instantly, I was wearing the brightest robe I'd ever seen. I was perfectly spotless. I was perfectly clean. So bright, in fact, man, I thought I'd go blind. I said, whose is this? He said, actually, it's mine. So think twice before you eat what society feeds us. Come follow the king. His name is Jesus.
So that's a gritty poem. That's a raw and honest poem, but it's a real poem. And I think, you know, the fun part about our stories is they're polar opposite. And I'll let you talk about that in a second. But as you guys just saw with me sharing my story there, I have had to walk a journey of finding healing from poor past decisions. And I know that's probably some of you guys watching out there. And so, yeah, that's what we want to talk about. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. But the first thing I'll share specifically with someone who's maybe made some poor decisions that are affecting them. The usual thing that's really heavy on a topic like this is shame.
Totally.
Is shame. Shame can be so overbearing on someone's life of, man, I'm not good enough. I'm too dirty, either for my spouse or for the Lord, and all these different things. And that the bad thing I want to say is, or the hard thing about that is, it creates a really bad cycle where shame puts you in isolation, puts you in a hole. And here's the truth of the matter for those watching out here: you are loved by Jesus. I just want you to hear that. Whether you're, well, we're all broken, first of all.
Right.
Whether you have serious, significant past issues, or maybe something that you can't think of right off the top of your head, you have something that's broken and hurt. But the cool part is Jesus came to reconcile, to restore, to redeem, and to put us back together. Jesus didn't come for the healthy, he came for the sick. And so it's okay to admit, I'm sick, because that means that's exactly the person he came for, and that's you. And so I just want to think, the one example I think of that I know really helped me is this idea of union with Christ, or union with Jesus in the scripture. Just a little Bible trivia for people out there. There's this phrase in the Bible that says Jesus, we are in him. It says it over 100 times, where we are in Christ, in the beloved, in
Especially
Jesus.
Ephesians 1.
Yeah, Ephesians 1 is huge if you want to really see this. And what that basically is trying to say is that when you trust Jesus with your whole life, then the benefits Jesus has and what's true of Jesus becomes true of you.
Yeah.
And so even though you might feel dirty because you're in Jesus now and you're married to him, he's clean, you're clean.
Yeah.
He's pure, you're pure. And the quick example I'll give to illustrate this is it was like when we got married, right? Like when you get married, you merge bank accounts, right? And let's say when we got married, I had $0 to my name, which was pretty much, I'm close to the truth, by the way. And let's say when we got married, Alyssa had $1 million to her name.
Which is not true at all.
But would have been amazing and
let's
awesome.
Let's say I had $300 to my name.
Yeah, but when we get married, right, we merge bank accounts. So now once we're married, do I all of a sudden have $1 million in the bank account? Yes. Wow, now did I bring that to the table? No, but we are now married, and what was true of you is now true of me, and that's true of Jesus and grace and love. But what would you add on that real quick?
Well, I think just adding on to that, I think no matter what your story is, whether you have had some sexual brokenness in the past, or maybe you grew up in the purity culture, which I did.
Yeah, and you feel like you've never made bad decisions.
Yeah, and like Jeff, I didn't hold anybody's hand until Jeff when I was 22. Regardless of what spectrum you're on, there's some distortion and there's some brokenness no matter what. And so I think maybe if it's a little more broken, I think it's really important to seek a mentor to talk about it, to be healed. Because how many girls have been sexually abused, like one of four? It's so common. And so seeking that mentorship, and then also in your marriage, just talking about it and really showing grace to each other and finding healing in that too.
Yeah, and I think that's the ultimate thing we want you guys to hear. Everyone's on a journey. Everyone has possibilities and areas of growth in this area. And don't be afraid to get on that journey towards growth. We're so excited to tell you about these 2 guidebooks and then also our main book, Love That Lasts. Now, what this is these are books that we wrote. They came from our story. 2 of them are guidebooks, so they have exercises and kind of fill in the blanks and things of that. Yeah, things of that nature. And then a main book that's our story. That's our journey of dating, breaking up, getting engaged, getting married, having kids. And what these 3 books in total are trying to do is answer the question of what's God's vision for marriage, for sexuality, for the journey we're on in dating and engagement and romance.
And then the workbooks are just things we've learned on the 12 main topics in marriage. You know, communication, conflict, and the mentors that have poured into us and given us so much wisdom on those topics.
Receive your copy of Love That Lasts as TBN's thank you for any gift of support today. And with a gift of $70 or more, we'll also include the His and Hers interactive workbooks. Call or click now to share a gift and request yours, and start building a love that lasts.
Tim Keller is one of our favorite pastors, writers, and speakers, and he's blessed our marriage so much, and I know he's going to bless you guys. We have a video from him right now answering the question, is sex outside of marriage okay or not?
Porn is destructive because if sex is like money, then porn is a massive devaluation of the currency. Sex inside of a committed marriage is magic. It's like blowing on the coals of this incredible, beautiful, and powerful flame. Sex outside of marriage is just a way of not giving yourself, but of receiving fulfillment and pleasure. And like all addictions, the more you do it, the less payoff there is. It's like an addiction, and the more you do it, the less payoff. So it becomes less and less and less powerful and less pleasurable. Whereas sex inside marriage, where you're not so much taking as giving, I can just say personally, after years and years and years of doing this with my wife, with one woman, it becomes sweeter and more pleasurable and more powerful and more transforming as the years go by, even when actually neither of you look as good as you did before. And in some ways, what a lot of things that people think have to be there as part of sex just aren't there when you're in your 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. And yet it's actually a more powerful experience because you haven't devalued the currency. Sex is a way of saying to another person, I belong completely and exclusively and permanently to you. And that's something you can only say inside marriage. And when you use sex to say that, it really is incredibly valuable and rich.
So I love Tim Keller. I love how he said that. And be reminded that every time you have sex, it's reciting your vows to each other, essentially. Like, you're recommitting yourself to each other. And so it doesn't even make sense to have sex outside of marriage, which is really hard and probably...
Because you haven't made vows to that person.
Right. It's probably mind-blowing because no one else is telling you that. Everywhere in the whole world, culture, TV, it's just... You know, you can have sex with whoever you want because it's just a physical thing. But if you realize that it's a spiritual thing and it's reciting your vows to each other, it's only safe within the commitment. It's so life-giving. And I think the biggest picture that I love is that sex is like a fire. And we love fire. It keeps us warm. But if you have fire in the middle of your house, it's going to burn down. But if you have fire in the fireplace, it's going to keep the whole house warm and everyone safe. So it's really, sex is such a good thing and so beautiful, but it's really about the context and the context of having it in marriage.
Yeah, and obviously Keller said it best than we could, but we love that point that he makes, is that it's a picture. Sex is a picture of what's going on in your relationship, of representing your relationship. And the best way to say is why sex outside of marriage is not okay is because don't let your body say something your life isn't willing to say. Right? So it's like, don't let your body say, I'm one with you, I want to be with you, you can have all of me. If your
but
life's
you can't
not
really
saying,
have all of me.
if your life's not saying, I'm one with you, you can have all of me, and we're going to join lives together. And I think a lot of times it kind of flips it on its head, and it's opposite of sex outside of marriage is opposite of sex in marriage, right? Because sex outside of marriage, you and Keller talks about this too, you kind of have to perform, and it's all about putting your best foot forward.
And I feel like you can't be totally vulnerable.
Yeah, because there's not that covenant and promise hanging over it. And that's really what it's about, is that sex is actually about giving yourself to the other person, about using it as a picture of your wedding vows. And that's why he says it's renewing your vows and this picture of intimacy, of beauty, and of life. And that's why it's so important that sex was created, not for outside of marriage, but for inside the marriage and inside the covenant. We are so excited for our new book, Love That Lasts. And yes, that is cartoon characters of us on the front. And the question is, what do we know about love that lasts? And that's the whole point of this book. We really don't, but we want to come alongside you in your journey as people peer-to-peer saying, what is God's heart? Asking the same questions you are for sexuality, for marriage, for love, and for dating.
We're so excited. We kind of trace our whole stories throughout it. Growing up, our childhood, when we dated, we were engaged, and then marriage, and what God taught us through it. And I think the cool thing is we had come from two totally different views. Jeff was more the prodigal son lifestyle, and I came more for the purity, love that waits culture, which is good, but has some distortions too. So we talked about both of those and how God gave us hope and healing in it.
Call or click now to share a gift and request your copy of Love That Lasts as TBN's thank you for any gift of support today.
Okay, so now we have a really cool video for you guys from John Mark Comer, a pastor in Portland, who talks about what is sex. And I think that's so important for us to know because our culture is really confused about it. So I'm really excited to show this video to you guys.
So I find that there's a ton of talk right now in the world with my friends, with my family, my neighborhood about sex and about what sex is. And I also find, at least as a follower of Jesus, that there's a chasmic gap between culture at large's definition of sexuality and God's definition. And by that I mean from the scriptures, as Jesus would define it, as the biblical authors would define it. So basically, as I read it, culture at large defines sex as recreational play between two consenting adults. So it's just physical, it's just the biological coupling of two bodies for sexual release. And what's the big deal? As long as it's between two consenting adults, if it's mutually pleasurable, what in the world is the big deal? It's just play for grown-ups. And then the church often comes along and says, all right, here's all the rules. Here's where you can do it and here's where you can't do it. But they buy into culture's definition of what sex is. And then basically say, well, you can do it, but only in marriage. And oh, by the way, only marriage between a man and a woman, not a man and a man or a woman and a woman. And to most of us, that's just nonsensical. If you're not a follower of Jesus, you hear that and you think, what kind of crazy, uneducated, traditional, outdated thing is that? That makes no sense. But reality, we have to get behind it to the definition of what sex is. So as I read the scriptures, as I read the teachings of Jesus, here's how I understand sex. In Genesis chapter 2, the word echad is used, that in sexuality, two people become echad, or it can be translated one flesh. This is a graphic, weighty word that basically means, when it's put together with this word flesh, fused together at the deepest level. That in sex, a man and a woman come together and are fused together at the deepest level. It is the bonding of two people into one entity, body and soul, physical and spiritual, because there's no way to bifurcate the two. So it's actually a much higher view of sex than culture's. Culture basically says, hey, it's just play, it's just biological, what's the big deal? God says, whoa, 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 no, it's way more than that. It's two people who become one entity and then over and over again enjoy and express love for one another through sexuality. Now, inside of marriage, this is beautiful because it takes two people and it doesn't let them drift apart. It keeps them together. It keeps them echad, or one. But outside of marriage, this can be dehumanizing because it can turn people into objects for basically self-gratification. And then every time you walk away from a sexual partner, it's as if you tear echad, as if part of you is lost. And you do that enough times and it starts to hollow you out from the inside. So I, as a follower of Jesus, think that we need a higher view of sex than culture at large is, not a lower view. We need to get back to the mysterious, beautiful, powerful reality of what happens when a man and a woman make love.
Okay, so John Mark is one of my favorite pastors, and I love what he said about how sex is the oneness and bringing together echad, the Hebrew word, which you'll talk about a little more. But I think, too, one thing to remember in sex and why it's important in marriage, too, is that it's all about giving and not receiving. And I think outside of marriage, it really is all about receiving. What can they do for me? Pleasure.
Yeah.
But in marriage, it's about taking. It's about giving. How can I serve my husband? What does he like? What does he not like? How can we become one person?
Totally.
And then being really thankful for them and having this beautiful picture of how we're one with the Lord and having that full intimacy and being fully known and fully accepted and being totally vulnerable at the same time.
Yeah, and two thoughts. The first one is, like you said, that beautiful word John Mark talked about, echad, which is the Hebrew word for oneness. We translate that word as just flesh, so when it says, and the two will become one flesh, but that doesn't really do it justice. No. It truly means just fused together at the deepest parts of their being, which means spiritually, emotionally, mentally, physically. You're intertwining. I almost kind of get this picture of DNA, that double helix. Yeah. You're kind of intertwining your entire lives. And that's what true oneness is, and that's echad. And sex becomes an outflow or a picture of that, of when you're joining yourselves spiritually, emotionally, physically, and all those things, and sex becomes a picture and a pulse on those very things. And I
think it's really important, too, because in our culture, we really separate, and in Christian culture, too, we separate the physical from the spiritual.
Yes.
So we think that our body isn't really connected to our soul, but really what we do with our body affects our
spiritual
soul.
life.
And so if you're having sex with somebody that isn't your husband, it's going to affect you.
Totally. And I'll just close with this thought. There's, it really comes down to the covenant. And that's a really big word in the Bible that a lot of people misunderstand. But all it basically means is it's any human relationship where the promise in that relationship is stronger than the two behaviors of the two people in that relationship. And a covenant is a relationship where the promise is that sustaining power. And I think sex was meant to be in that context. And here's why. Because when you're in a covenant relationship, a relationship where the promise is the strongest thing, then you can fully let the guard down. Think about that. You can fully take the mask off.
Because they're not going anywhere.
Exactly, because they've made a promise to stay no matter the behavior.
Yeah.
And so that's where kind of sex fires on all cylinders, where it's this true true nakedness, and not physically, emotionally, mentally, where you see all that the other person is, you see all their frailties, their failures, their hurts, their past, and in the midst of that, you say, I'm not going anywhere, I still want you. And then sex on top of that becomes this real beautiful picture to show that, to display that. And so we love you guys. We want to end with that thought. We hope it's an encouragement to you. We know this can be a weighty topic, but go back to your spouse, ask questions, talk to each other. So we hope you guys enjoy. Take care.
Coming up next week, we will be talking about the theology of marriage, or the why, the purpose behind it. Why did God create marriage, and what exactly is it for?
Yeah.
And I think it's so important. I'm really excited for it because I think most of us grow up with the desire to get married.
Yeah.
When I was 5, I was a bride for Halloween because I saw my parents with such a great marriage, and I was like, man, I really want that. But we don't always know why we should get married or what God has intended for it. So I'm really excited, and we have a couple guests joining us.
Yeah, we have 2 special couples. We have Sean and Catherine Lowe, who are from the Bachelor franchise, and we also have Chip and Joanna Gaines, which most people know from Fixer Upper. Now, why I'm excited about that is both of them have had to live in the spotlight, which puts a lot of pressure on them and has allowed them to build some insight and wisdom about what is marriage for, why are we here. I think more than almost most couples have had to think through in a lifetime. So we're so excited. Stay tuned. See you next week.
We are so excited for our new book, Love That Lasts, because it's a book with our story, about our story, primarily on why God's heart and vision for sexuality, marriage, and love is better than ours. These are books that we wrote. They came from our story. 2 of them are guidebooks, so they have exercises and kind of fill in the blanks and things of that, things of that nature. And then a main book that's our story, that's our journey of dating, breaking up, getting engaged, getting married, having kids.
And then the workbooks are just things we've learned on the 12 main topics in marriage. You know, communication, conflict, and the mentors that have poured into us and given us so much wisdom on those topics.
If you appreciate programs like this, we hope you'll help TBN keep them coming to you by sharing a gift of support. As you do, we'll say thank you by sending you their eye-opening new book, Love That Lasts. And with a gift of $70 or more, we'll also include the His and Hers interactive workbooks. Call or click now to share a gift and request yours, and start building a love that lasts.